How you doing? Welcome, 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 welcome. Thank you for stopping by tonight. We really appreciate you coming and hanging out with us. Silver Room Book Talk. My name is Mario. Although I can't see you, I'm very glad to see you on a very hot and muggy day in Chicago, Illinois. And we are about to really get into it with our guests. Um, Before we start, give me 10 seconds, please. Less than 10. Um, so let's begin, if you guys don't mind. First, let me introduce to you Alexandria Eregbu. She is a first generation Igbo American artist and educator whose practice draws from craft, material histories, and surrealist activity to deepen her connectivity to the natural world. Her work is driven by the crisis of memory, often studying Black African stories and objects between West Africa and the Caribbean, and her birthplace, the beautiful city of Chicago. Her creative platform, Finding Ijoma, offers curated experiences, designed objects, and consultation for clients engaged in the arts through commissions, DJ sets, workshops, exhibitions, and events. Most recently, Alexandria released The Reason Why We Hunt, a prologue for her forthcoming film, Miri Origin Stories. Currently, Alexandria teaches as a lecturer in the Department of Fiber and Material Studies. I've never heard of that until tonight. Fiber and Material Studies at the Art Institute of Chicago. Please, everybody, welcome Alexandria Eregbu. Thank you for being here. And oh my goodness, I never knew this day would come. From Latvia, my old friend Obiora Nwazota. He is a Nigerian-born architect, entrepreneur, and celebrated tastemaker here in Chicago. In 1996, we'll call him Obi. Obi came to America to study architecture at the University of Illinois School of Architecture. Upon graduation, he worked for one of the most innovative interior design firms in Chicago. His projects with the firm were widely published and won numerous awards. Obi is the owner of the Orange Skin Showroom and Minotti Chicago Monobrand Showroom. In 2016, he launched the critically acclaimed Nigerian restaurant, Little Unikoko. Did I say that correct?
Unikoko.
Thank you. That's why we're friends. To return to his roots, exploring and presenting Igbo culture. His latest project, Okpara House, is a producer of Igbo content. The mission is to harness the power of good design, dialogue, and academic research as powerful agents to stimulate, reactivate, elevate, and reimagine Igbo culture. Through this, he reclaims and asserts Igbo culture's relevance to contemporary lifestyles within and beyond the Igbo community. The first asset is his book, Nkemdiche, Why We Do Not Grow Beards, published in 2021 and available at the Silver Room on 53rd and Harper here in beautiful Hyde Park. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Obi. What's up, Obi?
Everything and nothing, brother.
Big. It is really good to see you both. I congratulate you on your new book. It is really cool. It's a dope read. And young people will really get it. And please, folks, get this book for your kids at the Silver Room. Do that.
Super.
I'm going to let you guys chat for a moment with each other. I shall return. Thank you both for being here. And we will let Alexandria lead this off.
Super.
Okay. Thank you, Mario, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you also to the Silver Room, Eric, Jessica, Obi, and Ibere for organizing this event this evening. I'm really happy to be here and be speaking with Obi. If you hear some background noise, I am in East Garfield Park and it's summertime in Chicago. So people are doing fireworks. But anyways, I'm happy to be here with you all and talk about this wonderful text that is Nkemdiche. So there's a few things that I want to talk about, like right off the bat, Obi. I think one thing that we do really share is the appreciation for storytelling. And Also, just kind of in our diverse backgrounds, somehow making our way back to centralizing the concept of storytelling within our daily practices. And I wanted to first point all of us to this quote from Chinua Achebe that I think you might know, Obi. And then also just sort of like talk about why storytelling, publishing specifically, felt like a important pivot for you today. And then also talk about like some of the important concepts that came up for me in the book. So firstly, I just wanted to start with this quote from Chinua Achebe during his interview with Bill Moyers. And he says that it is the storyteller who makes us what we are, who creates history. The storyteller creates the memory that the survivors must have. Otherwise, their surviving would have no meaning. And so this quote is something that has resonated with me in particular. And I feel like I also saw it in your newsletter, correct me if I'm wrong. I think the very first, the very first one that came out. And I just wanted to know if you would be willing to speak on that for a little bit, and maybe we can kind of kick things off from there.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Again, my thanks to the SlvrRm, Eric, Mario, to Jessica, of course, to the most beautiful Alexandria, and to the guests that are all watching from wherever you all are, from all over the world. Thank you again, I have to say. Yeah, storytelling, well, like the quote you just aptly phrased from Chinua Achebe, we are a people of storytellers, actually. You know, that's what is replete across Black African cultures. But it becomes even so much more powerful when you look at events of the 20th century, migrations, be it forced or be it, you know, instigated by different elements within our places of birth. And you find out that at the end of the day, it's your suitcase and your narrative that you take to wherever you take anywhere across the world that you now plant new roots. And for us particularly, Black Africans, in the 20th century and however we got caught up in migration, one of the things I noticed leading up to the creation of Okpara House is actually how our narratives were never part of the focal point of these migrations, actually. We physically came, we adopted our new homes, but the narratives were not part of what we brought as part of what we shared with our new neighbors, the new cultures that we found ourselves. And so this disconnect has always been quite unsettling for me. And you know, and at the point where at the first opportunity for me, I wanted to actually express this thing that has always been a nagging thing in my life. And in research also, you find out that there was also this violent disconnect between us and our brothers and sisters that happened somewhere around 300-400 years ago. And so you would expect, or at least in my little head, that when we now reappeared some odd 3 centuries later, it's the stories and the narratives that we brought along with us were the things that would connect us to the disconnect that we had with our brothers and sisters, as a way of also establishing our joint nobility in a shared past, you know. So, yeah.
Yes, thank you so much for that. I mean, I think often being a first generation Igbo American woman, not knowing my father's native tongue, Igbo, still working, I mean, and this is why these words, and I think also the glossary that you included in Nkemdiche is so important, right? Because you are reminding us of our native tongues. Language being, I think, one of the, as a byproduct of colonization and slavery, being one of the violent disconnects, right? And without language, we're really limited in the ways in which we can tell stories. Then it shows up in our art, right? And so, you know, for me as an artist, one of the things that was absolutely invaluable while reading this text and experiencing the text was not only, it was the story, of course, but it was also the storytelling that was embedded within the design elements, and seeing some of those familiar motifs and symbols and art objects, the Igbo door, right, Mbari, all of these things, the cowrie shells, the foods, the yams that would be sold at the marketplace. These things were just so special to me because I began my journey really starting to integrate some of this material and these concepts into my art practice about 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. And it really started with really becoming asphyxiated with the material and the plant indigo, and learning that indigo was a part of not only the foundation of early Northern American or United States history, but also it was a crop that is primarily used in West Africa and heavily used in Nigeria in our clothing and garments, and even our sculptures to a degree, our power objects. When I saw, again, some of these just familiar symbols and things pop up within the work, I definitely wanted to also speak to you just about how your process really for integrating image and word. I think you did that really so brilliantly between your collaborations with the designer, and also knowing that you have a design background yourself, right? Can you talk to us a little bit about how you were thinking about that?
Yeah, okay, thanks actually for that excellent observation, actually. This book was very important as for me, particularly from a position of not trying to trivialize our existence. And by that, I mean, you know, like when our stories have always been told by the other, the tendency was to end up in a simplified version of the idea of us. And so much gets lost because you can't, you know, the person telling your story doesn't know your story. And so they can only approximate an idea of what they think it is. And usually it is not so. And so you know, and you know, as part of the research, actually it took pretty much close to 2 years of research, you know, from an anthropological perspective to an ethnographic perspective to art, you know, cosmology, all kinds of things, to now find a way to now tell, you know, use such complex material and then tell the story from a simple perspective, you know, so using simple stories to tell complex things about this incredible culture. And so, of course, you wanted to put everything, but you just couldn't. But then in that, you know, in that need for such things, you start to realize the difference between when it is you telling your story from a position of the inside versus someone telling the story from the position of the outside. And you start to find out, or you begin to become aware that the imagery of the African, which has so far been defined by the other, has always been an image from a telescope, from afar. You know, it's an exterior image, never one that actually invited us into the interiors. Therefore, the elements that surround our lives, the objects, the symbols, all that stuff has and continues to a great extent been objectified, you know, such that they're taken out of context of their everyday use. You know, so you go to a museum, you see a so-called African mask, but without the subjectivity, without, you know, the understanding of how it actually played or it was integrated into our daily lives. Or you see an African pottery, but then it's objectified and put onto a pedestal as opposed to it being an everyday used object. And so you don't know how that was actually used in our lives, what ritual, you know, how it was ritualized, how, you know, all the different complexities of what it was all about, you know. Or you see an African fabric, oh, this is, you know, Psycha, you know, 18 something Psycha, 1929, and it's put up, you know, put behind the glass. And again, that disconnect, you know. And so I wanted to show this internal idea of us, you know. So you see an object of ritual appearing within the context of a king's place and how it's actually positioned, although abstract, but it's still fulfilled that sensibility of like, this is actually real and this is how they lived and how we lived, you know. But anyway, yeah.
Yes, I mean, there's so many points from what you just shared that I think are absolutely essential here. I mean, for one thing, I'm just thinking about the present nature of showing Africa and African people for who they are presently, and not only exclusive to who we were in the past. This is actually something I've been kind of dedicating my research to, really reading the work of Nigerian authors, and a couple who have also come up for me is Nadia Okorafor's Broken Places and Outer Spaces, and when she talks a little bit about how what drove her to in addition to just an injury, like one of her tragedies, which Achebe sort of contributes why it's essential to write as well, as so that we can understand our tragedies and remember them and heal from them. Nady wrote to remind us and remind herself of sort of the present nature as it relates to African people's use of technology in science fiction, and also African people's relationship to the future as well as the present. She says something very beautifully in here. I'm just going to quote it really quickly, because I don't want to get it wrong. She says that the African I was seeing in literature was a place of the past that was left behind, a place whose value was in it being the cradle of civilization millennia ago, a place whose culture many like to appreciate as a place they left behind, and then from a distance, a place that had no specifics. People went to Africa, not a country or a particular city in Africa. A place whose greatness existed only in its imagined state where colonization didn't happen. The part of Africa that I knew existed and that was very much in the present and hurtling into the future in a really cool, unique way, I wanted to write about that place. So I feel, I mean, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I do want to talk a little bit about Okpara House as a publishing company, and maybe a little bit more about your vision with that, and kind of how Nkemdiche kind of launched, was the beginning of launching maybe a broader trajectory.
Yeah, okay. So first of all, a bit of a small correction. Okpara House it's more or less a platform. It's not a publishing house, but it does contain a publishing house as part of an expansive array of things that we're going to be exploring, and Okpara House exists literally to actually make real a lot of the things that we've forgotten about our creativity as a people. And so through publishing, we tell stories. Through design objects, we actually explore everything from sacred objects to the things that we surround ourselves by. And, there's dialogue, there's all kinds of things. And so without going into a whole lot more details, because there's so many things in the planning stages, and I think I'd like for it to come out as we continue to birth and make real a lot of these content. But, I imagine it as, as a rebuild. It's a rebuild of an entire ecosystem that had been forced to be abandoned, and while in a state of rot, has also been rejected by the very people that built it in exchange for something completely alien from us that was also forced on us by those that with the actual intent was to deny and to suppress and to make do with what actually defines us as a people. And so when you look at it, you begin to realize that, I remember, I woke up one day and I literally asked myself a simple question. If someone came into my place, my apartment, my home, and I wasn't present, how would they know that they were in the home of a Black person? At first, you're like, well, maybe my paintings, my choice of this and that and that, until you realize that even when it comes to paintings, most of our art are actually owned more by non-Africans than they are owned by Africans. Does it now enshrine, or does it make those people that own those things Black? No, it doesn't. And then you begin to really delve a bit deeper, and you begin to realize that beyond the objects, even the ideas that were ritualized, the way we existed, has all been cleaned away, has all been stripped away from us. And so a total rebuild, psychologically, physically, physiologically, has to actually occur if we were to find our voices, if we were to find our economic strength, and so forth and so forth and so forth and so forth. And so, yes, it could be daunting, it could be terrifying, but on the other side, it's actually an incredible thing to actually come to that realization and then realize, oh my goodness, so much to be done. So, of course, so little time, but it's so exciting to be able to say, oh my goodness, such a new lease on life. And we've got to rebuild. Okay, we've got to do this, we've got to do that, you got to do this. And it's an incredible feeling. And so that's, in a sense, the impetus for Okpara House's existence.
Yeah, I love that you corrected me there. The vision of what Okpara House is, like being someone who does not like being boxed in myself. I think it is really important to keep an undertaking such as this, which I feel you and I agree with you, is absolutely essential and necessary, a total ecological rebuild as it relates to our cultural institutions, as it relates to our education, as it relates to the sources in which we get our learning from. as it relates to probably even right down to how we talk to one another. And so, yeah, I love that you kind of made that clarification there. And I think that I just can't express enough how important I think that this work is that you're doing. So thank you. Do you have any questions for me?
Well, okay. I've always been intrigued by finding Ijoma. So Ijoma, actually I have a cousin who's also called Ijoma. And Ijoma in our language, it's the beautiful journey, or the wish for the outcome of a journey to be a positive one. And so finding Ijoma was so intriguing for me, as like, when I coming at it purely from, the definitions of how it would sound in the culture, where one is looking for, I'm looking for the goodness in a journey, or the goodness to a journey, or to a particular journey, and did you find it? And when found, what was it all about? So yeah.
I mean, I think the journey is ongoing, that the name of Finding Ijoma is, there's several stories behind it. I mean, for one, it's my middle name. And it's a name that was given to me after my dad's older sister, who passed away early. So I always, when I was thinking about the concept of Finding Ijoma also as a creative platform studio, I was always thinking about just that relationship to that very present familial history. But then also what kind of started Finding Ijoma was in 2015. I don't know. I think I was in a little bit of a crisis, and I had just graduated school not too long ago, undergrad art school, and I was having trouble finding a job, and I was looking for things to do with myself, and so I did what you do, and kind of looked at the objects around me, the possessions that I had around me, and I saw that I had all of this extra fabric lying around. And so the first thing that sort of came to me was to create these bags, these tote bags and wallets that I called the Finding Ijoma traveling totes and wallets, that eventually I ended up selling to friends and family that were around me, and it ended up being something that inspired performative work, something that inspired this residency program that I was involved with at the Cultural Center, and opportunity for me to really open up just this overall self-exploration that I have been undertaking since I began my artistic journey 12 years ago. An opportunity to collaborate with like-minded individuals and share space in the form of workshops and other curated events. And so since then, the work has really involved to really writing about my own travel experiences, looking for Igbo roots or Igbo culture and the places that I have visited that have kind of inspired me the most. So most recently, I would say that Bahia and Brazil was one of those places. Also Martinique, the time that I spent there with my family in the Caribbean, and a couple of my colleagues, Devin and Krista. learning about just that island as a crossroads for food and sounds and art and design, and like listening to my father talk about this place, his home, that I have never been, but how all of these plants, these images, these stories reminded him so much of home. And finally, I felt like, it was just a really special trip for me and my family because, it was a place that I had went to on my own initially, and then to be able to invite them, it was something nice that we were able to share together. But yeah, the goodness and journeys, it's like I said, it's ongoing. It's something that I am always looking for, and trying to find new opportunities, whether that be in writing or welcoming others into my space, whatever type of space that I have, to share it with me. That is what Finding Joma is all about.
Super, super. Yeah, so I mean, I'll just chime in a little bit that, the time from when you graduated and then looking for something to do is actually quintessential Igbo, in a sense that, it's been known that if you go into Igbo land, there are no beggars, because everybody, even if you're selling a grain of sand, you've got to do something as a sense of, dignity to survive, as opposed to looking for handouts and things like that, which is very rare to see in Igbo land. So I'm actually looking at, I think there's a question. How important was the use of traditional Igbo folklore in Nkemdiche for giving context to the story, presenting this work as distinctly Igbo? Does it hint at storytelling techniques from other cultures in Nigeria? And why was it important to write this as an all ages children's book? Okay, so there's quite a lot of questions there. Okay, I'll begin. I'll just start from the title. Names in Igbo culture are unlike how we name in the West. Names actually carry an incredible amount of weight. It's the names in itself is a story. It's bound in story. It's historical. You could actually tell so much in terms of events, rituals, occurrences, simply by a name given to someone. And in a time or in a place of oral culture, we found ways to still carry history through. And names happen to be one of those, I want to use the word coded elements that meant a lot to those that knew what the codes were versus those that did not. And so a lot of times, because we never had written history, people that had hidden histories tended to think that we were people without history. And yet we carried it in so many forms that were coded that to the outsider, it felt like we carried nothing. And yet we were full of it from our names onwards. And so Nkemdiche in this case is also symbolic of that. Nkemdiche actually means mine is different, or I am unique. And in a sense, that's when you read the story, it actually unfolds into why she was what's the character that she essentially is, as this most beautiful heroine with the most amazing, beard plaited in all these distinct forms and all whatnot. And that's what made her completely unique. And so her name exemplified that. And then, of course, storytelling and, the traditional Igbo folklore was, again, a very educative part, a very important part of our culture in terms of educating children, but also throughout society. It was in our stories were proverbs, were morals, lessons, the ability to self-create in an instant as a reaction to events that were happening, events that have happened, events that are continuous, and so forth and so forth and so forth. And so within the context of today, part of what I realized, our folklore was our identity. And today, imagine across Black Africa, you have children going to school and their primary source of children's books, to a large extent, as pitiful as what I'm about to say is, it actually is factual. Our kids, Black kids learning as their primary situations, things like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and so forth and so forth and so forth. And at the end, you're asking, what kind of children am I raising? Am I raising a facsimile of the West, a copy of something, or, what exactly is it that I'm raising? Where your identity becomes pushed to the back as a postscript to the actual, to the investment into what our children are to be. And so part of this whole thing of, what we're doing with Okpara House is actually looking at foundations, the foundational elements of what becomes the story of our lives as, first as Igbo, then as, as Nigerian, Black African, whatever, and rebuilding those foundations from a critical and solid perspective. And so storytelling, for me, was reconnecting to an age-old tradition, a time when, we were great observers of the natural element, and then we now took our observations and then codified it through storytelling, which was understood at first because we were all part of that nature. But today we're so disconnected, with modernity, living in cities and all that stuff. And so storytelling isn't just taking, classics or, age-old things and then depositing it right into modernity. We now have to reimagine these things and recontextualize them in such a way that it also teases out the riches that are hidden within, but at the same time, pointing us, through our history into a future where we actually are authors of our own identities, our new identities, be it hybrid identities, be it identities that continue to stay pure, or however it's morphed in a modern context. The one thing that continues, that thread that binds us all, is this idea of the narratives of our past. And so, for me, it was a no-brainer. But then, in terms of an all ages book, when we first started writing, I also realized, the thing that we suffered wasn't just restricted to children. The children became adults that were also disconnected from their culture. And so it was important that this book not only it goes beyond storytelling, but also we went out of our way to actually explain certain concepts like as was actually mentioned earlier in terms of the glossary that was included in the book. It was very critical that these things were brought in, but there are also concepts that had become tainted through the introduction of alien ideas, be it through the new religions that were brought into our culture that actually took our culture, bastardized it, made it an enemy of its own self. It was important to actually rescue these things and re-explain these things for what they truly are versus what it had become, tainted. And I'm using really light words when I use the word tainted, because I could use even much more severe words in terms of, you know, the attack on our culture that had happened since, you know, a certain part in our history. But anyway, so I think with all the books coming out into the future, there's always going to be this exploration of all these themes, and it's important simply because it's needed, actually. And I'm not going to go into any more details. So, yeah.
Obi, can you talk also just a little bit about the decision to focus on, I mean, it's a women-centered story, right?
Oh, yeah.
Why did you make that decision?
Oh, man, thanks for asking that question. So, the Black woman gets a lot of rap. The Black woman is vilified, is celebrated, all those things. Some are true, some are not. But the one thing that had always been true is that she was an entity unto herself. And her existence, especially in Igbo culture, the woman was never subject to the whims of a man. She never existed underneath the man, but as a complement to her counterpart. So the women had institutions just as the men had institutions. The women were able to define their cosmos just as the men did theirs also. It was not an existence of competition, but actually an existence of complementary relationship. And to understand this, you had to also go into the culture to see some of these institutions, which we actually bring up in the book, like the Umuada, which is an institution of the first daughters. And why this is so important for me, in 2021, in the so-called first economy, the first country of the world, the United States of America, the most whatever country, we're still discussing the right to a woman's body, Roe v. Wade. We had already gone beyond that centuries ago. And we just got dragged down to a place where we're still discussing, should a woman have a right to herself? And so I needed to explain some of those things because sometimes we're looked upon as people without culture, people without a history, people without a thought. Let me be distinct and clear. We are an old civilization, but with it comes a lot of knowledge. We've gone through a lot and we've come out on the other side. And when you come out on the other side, you tend to actually hold yourself a particular way. And when you hold yourself a particular way, people think, oh, it's because you're not here to be a show-off. We're not a show-off. And that, to me, I think is rather very important. And so in this book, it's a book about power. It's a book about beauty. The fact that a woman, grows a beard in the Western context of beauty, beard is this oddly masculine, thing that's, you say a woman has beard and everybody already has this weird imagination of it. But it's only in our imagination can you take such an object, such a masculine object, and wield it as a feminine object or as any, as a genderless object, actually, and find beauty in it that actually still contains your physical beauty and separate it from this other beauty, and then put together again, create something that is completely different, that it's so familiar that when you hear the story, why we do not grow beards, and you realize, oh, it's actually why women don't grow beards. And then you see a woman, the portrait of the heroine with her fully plaited beard. It is familiar. It's not something that you're shocked to react to. You actually look at it and you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is so beautiful. Yes, it's beautiful because that's how we see things. And until our voices start to come out to actually express and add to the world's intellect in terms of how to observe nature, it would always have this other thing that is, for me, a bit less, I'm trying to find a word for it, not sophisticated. Maybe we use the word sophisticated actually, and that is, and to me, this speaks to our sophistication as an ancient people. So anyway, yeah.
It looks like we have another question in the chat that you might be interested in answering. If not, I can certainly ask another question.
Is it okay? How do we increase numbers of children's books about Black characters and get them into the hands of Black children? Well, that's what we're doing. That's what we the intention. Well, in our situation, and I also want to also say, first of all, a great realization also occurred in the process leading up to this project. The word Africa is such, it has such I don't want to use the word condescending, but it actually simplifies our existence in a place where you have such incredible complexity of language, of culture. Nigeria alone has in excess of 515, or to be exact, about 517 different languages. In other words, 517 different countries existing in this idea called Nigeria. It's kind of akin to saying, North America, Europe has how many countries? And that's the EU. Imagine if all that stuff was just one country. So, how could you now gloss over the entirety of French culture, German culture, Polish culture, and all that, and then create one culture called the European culture? Something sounds very hollow about that. And that's part of why, the project to create these books, we've not even attempted to scratch any surface at all. There's so much stories to be told by each one of those 517 languages or mini countries in Nigeria alone. Then imagine West Africa and so forth and so forth. And then you begin to appreciate the enormity. And so when you look at in the West, you see that maybe a white child, has access, maybe for every 2,000 books a white child identifies with, a Black child probably has 5. The catch-up game is a lot, but we've got the resources, and that is part of why I went back to folklores as a stepping stone. And then, of course, alongside, stories that are being told of the moment and so forth and all whatnot. But we need these foundations to be brought back and put back in a place that allows us to build this amazing building that, houses all these incredible stories coming out of this incredibly complex continent.
Yes, I love that you're speaking on the complexity and dynamism of our culture, of our people. And again, just kind of underscoring how symbolically I really feel like the hair, Black women's hair, Igbo women's hair really exemplified that. I just thought that was absolutely brilliant.
And speaking about hair, the uniqueness of our hair, we're the only humans of all humans on the planet that have this incredible thing. It's a hair that allows architecture to be part of our essence. In fact, in the book, we refer to it as hairchitecture, actually, you know. And so it's hair, the story of hair. It's a conversation for a completely different. It's a conversation for another day, because it's just unbelievable, you know. And we're just beginning to appreciate, simply from the position of freedom, you know, when we think about the Crown Act, when we think about the Tinyon laws that were enacted to force Black women to hide their hair, which obviously we turned around and created the scarves. Again, in the book, the loss of the beard was the beginning of growing out the hair on the head that showed our architecture. You know, so the architecture went from the beard to the hair, which we see till this day. And so it's also, this book again is also almost like a Genesis story to say why, you know, Black women are capable of great architecture, you know, using personal objects, and in this case, their bodies.
And truly mirroring our plentitude and abundance, you know, creatively and within. I think that that's another thing that kind of profoundly takes place within this text here.
Yeah.
So there's a few more questions. There's one about the aesthetic of the book and the intention behind the direction visually. And there's another question on coded language and how we get back to speaking our language.
Oh, geez. Are these for this particular day or for another day?
It might be for another day.
Yeah, each one is I mean, they're all beautiful questions. And this is actually part of why books like this matter, and why so much is actually poured into such a little book, because, you know, normally when the saturation actually is there, you see slivers of these books in other books. But because we don't have that, it all happens to be happening all in one, in one little book. And so there's so many talking points to actually jump off of, you know, but that also is part of what I hope is the inspiration that I hope young writers, old writers, all kinds of creatives can start to see, that there is so much, you know, in this little window we've opened that we need to explore, you know, beyond just the professional writers, you know, the creative, you know, the graphic designers, the illustrators, all these, you know, you name it. There is so much we need to start to actually harness our talent, to start to put it towards, you know, these, building these, you know, living images and living thoughts, you know, such that, you know, our people, our children, our future can become normalized in terms of their existence and how they see themselves every day. So anyway,
and I would say that's maybe how we get back to speaking our language, right?
Mm-hmm. And that's all part of, because you have to inspire those things. You have to make it hip again. You have to make it of the moment again, and so forth and so forth. And that's, you know, yeah. So anyway, yeah.
I imagine you'll also have to make that something that would be unique for us to be able to communicate with each other when around others. So that
right, and that precisely. Yeah. And I think it's all, you know, like when you create the interest, but also in the sense that when something has nobility, then there's a sense of pride that comes associated with it. that now makes people to invest and go out of their way to want to be part of that. And that's all part of the work that has to be done.
Well, we are right at 8 o'clock.
Remarkably on time. Well, not remarkably. This book is amazing, and it is available at the SlvrRm, and you should make it your business to come and get it as soon as you can. And from what I understand, Obi will be a guest on Randomly Selected soon, the podcast that is powered by the SlvrRm. And we hope that you are listening to Randomly Selected. Thank you very much. And that we are trying very hard to present and give you something a little unique in the podcast world. However, I would like to say right now that if you want more information about Alexandria and to follow what she's doing, you can view her work on her website, alexandriaeregbu.com. You can follow her on Instagram at Finding Ijoma for project highlights, most notably her film project, Miri Origin Stories. And for Obi is literally the busiest human being outside of Eric Williams on earth. Obi, his work can be found at okparahouse.com. You can follow him on Instagram at Okpara House for project highlights surrounding this Igbo content initiative and other Black diaspora design events. He will also be featured as a guest on the Randomly Selected podcast. So please stay tuned to the SlvrRm. Go to the media section on the website. You can find the radio show, which is Sound Rotation, and the podcast Randomly Selected. Buy the book. We don't sell enough books in the world.
And actually, can I also say something? Sorry, anyone listening, we want to get this book into schools. If you know how that can be done, please. I think it's something that is so important to me that this gets into schools so that not just, and I'm not talking Black schools, I'm talking schools, because our representation, our image, be it in the hands of others or in our hands, needs to be curated and controlled by us. And so whether this book is being read by a non-Black child, it also defines how they perceive you and how we are perceived. And that's so critical. And so I'm asking for all help because I really, if I knew how to do it, I wouldn't be asking. And I don't know how to do it. And I need for things, and there's so much material, so many. In fact, the next book, illustrations are done. I just actually came back from Nigeria with the illustrations literally about 10 days ago. Brought it to Chicago and then turned around and flew to Latvia a few days, like about 4 days ago. So yes, there's going to be lots and lots of these. They're not going to be series. Each one is a standalone because there's just so much to talk about. So anyway, I just wanted to ask and say that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Alexandria, thank you so much for being a part of our conversation. Thank you for leading the way this evening. And Obi, it is always good to see you, brother. I don't care if it's on a Zoom or in person, man. It's always good to see you in person.
Mario, thank you.
Sir.
Thank you so much.
We'll talk later.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We'll do.
Get some rest. For everyone, on behalf of Eric Williams and the team at the SlvrRm, thank you so much for being part of our book talk tonight. See you soon. Peace.
Thank you. Ciao.
Thank you.
Ciao.